In an audacious strike that has shattered the perceived inviolability of the Russian state's innermost security, a Ukrainian long-range aerial drone penetrated hundreds of miles of sophisticated air defenses to strike the official presidential residence at Novo-Ogaryovo, west of Moscow. The compound, a heavily guarded complex where President Vladimir Putin conducts official business and is known to reside frequently, sustained significant structural damage in the attack. While initial reports from Russian emergency services, later swiftly suppressed, indicated a direct hit on a residential wing of the estate, the most critical detail to emerge from intelligence channels is that President Putin was not present at the time of the impact. He had departed the residence for an undisclosed secure location hours earlier, a fact confirmed by multiple Western intelligence agencies monitoring leadership movements. This event represents not merely a tactical escalation, but a fundamental crossing of a psychological and geopolitical Rubicon. For the first time since the Second World War, the personal, secured space of a Russian leader has been directly targeted and breached, signaling a new phase of the conflict, where the core symbols of Kremlin power are now in the crosshairs. The attack occurred in the pre-dawn hours, leveraging darkness and sophisticated electronic warfare countermeasures. According to technical reconstructions based on satellite imagery, intercepted telemetry, and open-source analysis, the drone was a modified Ukrainian-designed UAV, evolving from earlier models used to strike targets in Moscow and beyond. Its flight path was deliberately circuitous, avoiding major population centers and known fixed air defense positions by traversing sparsely populated forest and wetland regions. It is believed to have flown at a very low altitude, exploiting terrain masking and advanced stealth-like materials to minimize its radar signature. The most significant technological leap, however, was in its ability to spoof or navigate through Russia's layered electronic air defense net. Analysts suggest it employed a combination of pre-programmed waypoints, passive sensor guidance, and potentially satellite-linked updates to adjust its course, effectively acting as a low-cost, one-way cruise missile. The final approach saw the drone ascend briefly before diving onto its target. Russian authorities claimed their Pantsir S-1 anti-aircraft systems stationed around the residence engaged and destroyed the drone, but that falling debris caused the damage. However, the precise impact point and forensic analysis of crater imagery strongly suggest a controlled detonation on target, contradicting the official narrative of an intercept. The global implications of this event are immediate and profound, fundamentally altering the risk calculus of the war. Firstly, it demonstrates a staggering failure of Russia's much-vaunted air defense architecture, particularly the Moscow-centric dome designed to protect the political leadership. This failure exposes a critical vulnerability at the heart of the Russian security state, suggesting either technical degradation, systemic gaps, or an intelligence leak regarding defense placements. Secondly, the strike represents the ultimate projection of Ukrainian resolve and capability. It sends an unambiguous message: no target, regardless of its symbolic sanctity or defensive depth, is beyond reach. This is a strategic communication aimed as much at the Russian elite and populace as at the international community, showcasing a shift from defending territory to taking the war directly to the symbols of Russian authority. Thirdly, and most dangerously, it creates an unparalleled personal threat perception for Vladimir Putin. The fact of his absence mitigates the immediate physical crisis, but the demonstration that his safe havens can be identified and struck fundamentally changes his personal security paradigm and, by extension, his decision-making environment. This introduces a volatile new element of personal survival into the strategic equation of a nuclear-armed state. Historically, this moment finds few parallels. The closest analogues are the daring Allied bombing raids on Berlin during the Second World War, or the strategic bombing of Tokyo, which aimed to shatter enemy morale and demonstrate the reach of Allied power. In the post-Cold War era, no permanent member of the UN Security Council has faced a direct attack on its head of state's official residence from another state actor. The attack also echoes, in a modern asymmetric form, the tactics of decapitation strikes that have been a feature of conflicts involving non-state actors or between smaller nations, but never applied so successfully against a major nuclear power. For Ukraine, this capability is the culmination of a relentless drone innovation program that began with makeshift modifications and has now achieved a strategic-level psychological effect. It reflects a doctrine of leveraging technology to compensate for a lack of traditional air power or long-range missiles, turning cheap, disposable platforms into weapons of immense political disruption. The historical context of Putin's own rise, rooted in the assertion of Russian strength and the restoration of a fortress state after the chaos of the 1990s, makes this violation of his personal fortress a uniquely potent symbolic blow. The political implications within the Russian Federation are catastrophic for the regime's image and potentially destabilizing for its internal cohesion. The immediate response will be an all-consuming, ruthless investigation by the Federal Security Service, FSB, and the National Guard, seeking to root out what will be presumed to be treasonous insider assistance or breathtaking security negligence. Heads will roll at the highest levels of the security apparatus. Commanders of the Air Defense District, heads of presidential security, and intelligence chiefs face almost certain dismissal, arrest, or worse. For Putin, the attack is a direct and personal humiliation that strikes at the core of his brand as the guarantor of stability and national strength. It forces him into a position of visible vulnerability, potentially altering his public demeanor and movements permanently. Within the opaque circles of the Russian elite, the event will be seen as a sign of potentially fatal weakness, encouraging quiet scheming and repositioning as powerful figures assess the longevity and competence of the current leadership. The social contract of Putinism, absolute security for the leader in exchange for managed stability for the populace, has been visibly broken. The regime must now respond with overwhelming force to reassert the illusion of control. But the demonstrated vulnerability cannot be undone. The economic repercussions of the strike are secondary to the security crisis, but still significant. The immediate cost involves the urgent overhaul and fortification of not just the damaged residents, but the entire network of secure presidential facilities across Russia. This will necessitate a multi-billion ruble emergency allocation, diverting funds from other budgetary priorities, including military and social spending, at a time of severe fiscal constraint. More broadly, the event will trigger a profound reassessment of security spending by the oligarchic and bureaucratic elite. Those who have relied on state-provided security models will now seek to invest exponentially more in private, parallel security arrangements for their families and assets, potentially creating well-resourced private militias and further eroding the state's monopoly on protective services. For the Russian defense industrial complex, already strained by wartime production, the failure of the air defense systems will prompt urgent, panic-driven commissions to develop and deploy new counter-drone technology and to patch gaps in the existing network. This may lead to rushed, poorly tested systems being fielded and could exacerbate quality control issues already seen in military hardware. The attack also indirectly threatens economic stability by signaling to international businesses that even the most secured locations in Russia are vulnerable, further deterring any future foreign investment and deepening the country's isolation. Socially, the impact within Russia will be managed through a fierce, dual-pronged information campaign. The state media narrative, already in motion, minimizes the physical event, framing it as a minor debris incident while maximizing its symbolic interpretation as an act of desperate NATO-backed terrorism requiring national unity and vengeance. The population will be bombarded with images of Putin appearing calm and in control from his secure location, aiming to project strength and normalcy. However, the cognitive dissonance for ordinary citizens will be potent. The unavoidable knowledge that a Ukrainian drone reached the president's home shatters the myth of a distant special military operation and makes the war palpably proximate. It introduces a new, unsettling anxiety about the potential for further deep strikes against other symbolic or infrastructure targets within Russia proper. For the Ukrainian public, the strike is a transcendent morale event, a demonstration of strategic patience and technological prowess that validates the sacrifices of the past 2 years. It reinforces the narrative of an adaptable, resilient nation capable of bringing the fight to the very heart of the regime that sought to erase it. Internationally, global publics witness a dramatic escalation, with the event dominating news cycles and raising widespread concern about the immediate potential for uncontrolled retaliation. International reactions are characterized by acute alarm and extreme caution. Official statements from NATO capitals are uniformly restrained, emphasizing concern over escalation and reaffirming support for Ukraine's right to self-defense, while carefully avoiding any endorsement of the strike's specific target. Diplomatic language is meticulously crafted to not provide Russia with a pretext for claiming direct NATO involvement. Privately, however, there is intense activity. Emergency hotlines between major powers are activated. Western intelligence agencies work to verify every detail to understand the capabilities demonstrated and to assess Putin's personal state. The G7 and EU convene urgent virtual meetings to coordinate a diplomatic response aimed at crisis containment. China and India, crucial to Russia, issue calls for immediate ceasefire and dialogue. Their statements notably cooler toward Moscow, reflecting grave discomfort at the prospect of a direct personal threat, triggering an uncontrollable response from a nuclear-armed partner. The United Nations Secretary-General issues a stark warning about the dangerous escalation, calling for maximum restraint from all sides. The international community finds itself in uncharted territory, managing a crisis where the established protocols for state-on-state conflict have been upended by a strike against a head of state's personal domicile. Expert analysis from security strategists, political scientists, and Kremlinologists points to a watershed moment with divergent possible outcomes. Security analysts note the attack validates a new era of asymmetric warfare, where non-state and smaller state actors can leverage cheap technology to achieve disproportionate psychological effects against even the most fortified regimes. The specific technical success suggests a possible intelligence coup regarding Russian air defense frequencies and placements, or a breakthrough in AI-driven evasion algorithms. Political analysts focus on the Putin dilemma. His response must be severe enough to restore the aura of personal invincibility and deter future attempts, yet not so severe such as a direct nuclear threat or an overwhelming attack on Western capitals that it triggers a response that could end his regime. He is likely to pursue a multi-track response, a massive, bloody bombardment of Ukrainian civilian and government infrastructure, a high-profile assassination campaign against Ukrainian officials abroad, and a renewed, explicit nuclear threat framed as a response to NATO's direct aggression in targeting Russia's leadership. Experts warn the situation is now inherently unstable, as Putin's decision-making may become more personalized, isolated, and driven by a heightened sense of threat, reducing the influence of moderating factions within the system. What could happen next is defined by this new instability. In the short term, Russia will unleash a campaign of retaliation designed to be visibly disproportionate, likely targeting Ukrainian decision-making centers in Kyiv with intense missile and drone barrages, and possibly attempting symbolic strikes on presidential buildings in Ukraine. Covert action globally will intensify. Within Russia, a sweeping political and security purge is inevitable, potentially removing long-standing figures from the inner circle and further consolidating power around a smaller, more paranoid group of hardline security officials. Military operations in Ukraine may see riskier, more aggressive pushes in an attempt to secure a tangible victory to offset the humiliation. Internationally, NATO will visibly enhance its readiness posture, particularly for ballistic missile defense and nuclear forces, while accelerating the transfer of advanced air defense systems like Patriots to Ukraine. Diplomatic efforts will focus on establishing clear, private boundaries to prevent miscalculation, while publicly maintaining solidarity with Kyiv. For Ukraine, the period following will be one of extreme vigilance against retaliation and intense diplomatic effort to solidify the new strategic reality that it can strike back at the center of Russian power, thereby strengthening its case for receiving even longer-range capabilities from partners. The long-term global consequences hinge on whether this event becomes an isolated peak of escalation or a new, sustained plateau of direct confrontation. It permanently alters the security paradigm for autocratic leaders worldwide, who will now witness the vulnerability of even the most fortified compounds to evolving technology. This will accelerate global investment in counter-drone systems and hardened facilities. The war in Ukraine enters a phase where the personal security of leadership becomes a central factor, making negotiations even more complex as personal survival instincts overlay national strategic interests. The international non-proliferation regime suffers a blow as the demonstration that a non-nuclear state can directly threaten a nuclear power's command apparatus could incentivize other nations to seek their own deterrence, nuclear or otherwise. Ultimately, the world is forced to confront a scenario it had relegated to Cold War fiction: a direct attack on the seat of power in Moscow. The coming days will test the mechanisms of crisis management to their absolute limits, as the line between conventional conflict and existential confrontation becomes perilously thin, and the actions of a single individual perceiving a direct personal threat could reshape the global order.